If you're thinking about buying a bike from a big-name brand this year, don't, because some of the biggest names in motorcycling are quietly collapsing. Sales are crashing, parts are vanishing, and resale values are in freefall. Riders are getting burned, and the excuses from manufacturers are wearing thin. And the worst part? We're not even at the bottom yet. The last brand on this list isn't just struggling, it's barely breathing, and it's dragging a 100-year legacy down with it. Let's start with the brand that once was America on two wheels. For number 6, it had to be Harley-Davidson. The name, the sound, the soul of rebellion. This brand didn't just sell motorcycles, it sold the #1 identity in American freedom culture. But in 2025, that identity is cracking under the weight of its own legend. There was a time when riding a Harley meant more than just owning a bike. It meant freedom, attitude, and a place in a brotherhood that stretched across continents. You weren't just another rider. You were part of a lineage, thunder rolling beneath you, chrome glinting in the sun. Today, the models that were once designed for new riders, machines meant to be attainable and raw, now start at over $13,000. By the time you leave the dealership, factoring in freight charges, dealer markups, and upgrades, you're often looking at $17,000 or more. For a company built on the working-class dream of the open road, those numbers hit like betrayal. And it doesn't stop there. The flagship touring bikes, road glides, street glides, and ultra-limiteds routinely break the $40,000 barrier. In an era where value matters more than vanity, Harley's pricing no longer reflects its roots. It reflects a brand priced into isolation. Then there's the tech, or lack of it. While competitors embrace liquid-cooled engines, advanced ride modes, digital displays, and cutting-edge safety systems, Harley continues to push an aging air-cooled Milwaukee 8 engine that hasn't meaningfully evolved in years. Just familiar gauges and a nostalgic rumble that sounds great, until you realize how far behind the ride feels. But the cracks go deeper than what's under the tank. Harley's image, once powerful and magnetic, is starting to collapse. Younger motorcyclists aren't interested in buying into an identity that tells them what to wear or who to be. They want versatility, innovation, freedom without the uniform. Harley's competitors have figured that out. Yamaha and Indian offer cruisers with better tech and sharper handling. Honda pushes modern performance in sleek design. Even the used market cuts deep. A 2015 Road Glide with under 20,000 miles goes for $15 grand and delivers nearly the same experience as today's model. Harley tried to reinvent itself with the Livewire, an all-electric gamble, but it launched at nearly $30,000 with a range under 150 miles. Riders shrugged, sales flopped. Harley spun the bike off into its own brand. The Revolution Max engine finally showed promise. Found in the Pan America and Sportster S, it proved Harley could innovate. But instead of overhauling the lineup, the company left these models isolated, surrounded by an aging fleet, still worshiping the past. The real problem? Time. Harley's core demographic is aging. New riders aren't showing up like they used to. The brand's legacy has become a trap, too iconic to abandon, too outdated to evolve. What once felt like rebellion now feels like ritual. Harley-Davidson isn't collapsing because it tried to change. It's collapsing because it tried to stay the same. You can survive bad pricing. You can survive outdated tech. But when a brand loses its identity, it starts to rot from the inside. The next name on this list had everything it needed to win, until it took a blade to its own image and cut too deep to heal. At number 5, it's Indian Motorcycles, the comeback story that once felt like a miracle on two wheels. After decades in the shadows, here was a resurrected legend, refined, muscular, and backed by the deep pockets of Polaris Industries. The Indian wasn't just back. It was better than ever. The bikes looked bold, felt fresh, and carried enough old-school soul to spark something deep in riders who remembered the name from a different time. For a while, Indian wasn't just Harley's competitor. It was its reckoning. But every brand has a soul, and in 2023, Indian quietly dismantled a piece of its own. It began with a memo, an internal message sent to dealers on February 13th. The multicolor Native American headdress logo, one of the most iconic and recognizable symbols in motorcycling, was permanently retired, replaced by a monochrome version that felt sanitized and safe. Indian framed it as a move toward cultural sensitivity and brand consistency. But to many loyal riders, it didn't feel like progress. That logo wasn't just a patch. It was the connection to Indian's origin stories. Riders didn't just buy the bikes for performance. They bought them for meaning. And when that logo vanished, it wasn't just aesthetic. It was a signal. The backlash came fast. Forums lit up. Social media exploded. Some called it to cancel culture, others corporate cowardice. But beneath the noise was a shared feeling: betrayal. The brand that had risen from the ashes was now burning its own foundation. Dealerships were left to pick up the pieces. The bigger issue wasn't the logo, it was what it represented. Indian had been walking a razor-thin line between authenticity and reinvention. Once the emotional connection cracked, everything else started to slide. The timing couldn't have been worse. Indian was gaining momentum with younger riders thanks to stripped-down models like the Scout Bobber and FTR, lean, aggressive machines that spoke to new generations. But younger riders are brand-aware and quick to spot a company that seems unsure of itself. The logo change exposed a brand second-guessing its voice. Meanwhile, Indian's dealership network is still small. It doesn't have the infrastructure of Harley, Yamaha, or Honda. That makes it dependent on loyalty and cultural gravity. When that's shaken, there's little left to fall back on. Longtime riders, the ones who cheered the return, felt abandoned. The emotional currency Indian spent a decade building was suddenly traded in for a safer narrative. And the bikes? Still solid, still beautiful. But in this industry, image is everything. Indian's internal shift created an external problem: confusion. Indian is standing at a crossroads. It can still choose a direction, but that window is shrinking, and the longer it hesitates, the harder it becomes to bring anyone along. A few bad marketing decisions? Sure. A controversial logo change may be recoverable, but $1 billion brand bleeding cash, freezing development, and laying off hundreds in real time, that's not a bad year. That's a death spiral. And the next brand? It's already circling the drain. Taking the fourth spot on our list is KTM, a name once synonymous with European off-road supremacy and aggressive, no-compromise engineering. In November of 2024, the headlines hit like a lightning strike. Pierre Mobility AG, the parent company behind KTM, filed for self-administration. That's not a buzzword, it's a corporate ICU, a desperate move to avoid outright bankruptcy by reorganizing under court protection. In plain English, they ran out of money. Investors watched as Pierre's stock plummeted by more than 80% in less than a year. Supply chain issues, overproduction, and inflation played a role. But those were just the symptoms. The deeper problem was systemic. KTM had overextended globally, ramping up production to over 1,000 motorcycles per day, banking on growth in emerging markets. When the demand didn't show, they were left with warehouses full of unsold inventory. To stop the bleeding, KTM hit the brakes hard. Factory lines were paused. Development on future models was frozen. Over 300 employees, engineers, designers, logistics specialists, were handed pink slips across Europe. The dream of expansion turned into a nightmare. The same brand that once celebrated record production is now struggling to keep the lights on. At the core of KTM's collapse is a brutal mismatch between ambition and sustainability. Their strategy had been to diversify, push premium performance in the West, while flooding emerging markets with small displacement entry bikes. The idea was sound, but the execution was reckless. Those entry-level bikes carried razor-thin margins, meaning KTM had to sell them in massive volume just to break even. When inflation hit, interest rates soared, and consumer spending tightened, the operation began to crack. And it cracked fast. Without the partnership it once had with Bajaj, the Indian manufacturing giant that sold its KTM shares in 2021, KTM lost access to critical production efficiencies. Now, The brand finds itself stuck in an expensive manufacturing cycle without the financial muscle to maintain it. Supply delays mounted. Dealers were left with showrooms packed with bikes they couldn't move. Even KTM's racing prestige couldn't shield it. Championships don't matter when you're asking creditors for more time to pay your bills. Think KTM's situation was the worst thing you've heard today? Think again, because at least KTM tried. The brand that comes next didn't just fail. It lied, stole, and left riders with nothing but receipts and broken promises. Next up, taking the third spot, Norton. Some brands stumble, but Norton was dragged through the mud, stripped of its soul, and barely stitched back together again. Once a crown jewel of British motorcycling, Norton's story isn't just about financial failure, it's about betrayal, the kind that leaves customers empty-handed, employees abandoned, and an entire legacy tainted by a single name. Stuart Garner. Back in 2008, Garner purchased Norton with grand promises. He pledged to bring the iconic mark back to glory, to build bikes that paid tribute to the golden days while pushing performance forward. For a while, people believed him. Factories were retooled, concepts were unveiled, orders were placed. Deposits rolled in from enthusiasts across the world, but behind the polished chrome and press releases was something far more rotten. By 2020, it all imploded. Norton collapsed under the weight of scandal, revealing a tangled web of mismanagement and outright fraud. Pension funds had been misused. Orders had been taken without bikes ever being built. Customers who thought they were on a waiting list found themselves holding worthless invoices. Even the motorcycles that were delivered came with problems. Quality control issues so severe, some bikes couldn't pass inspection. Employees arrived at locked gates. Emails went unanswered. The name Norton, once spoken with pride, became a punchline and a warning sign. For many, that was supposed to be the end. A sad, disgraceful death. For a brand that had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Triumph and BSA. But then came the twist. In April of 2020, Indian manufacturing giant TVS Motor Company stepped in and purchased Norton's remains for $20 million. A new headquarters was built. TVS promised to do what Garner never could: fulfill orders, restore trust, and elevate Norton into a global player once again. For a moment, hope flickered back to life. But rebuilding a broken legacy is harder than writing a check. Despite the money, the new facilities, and the effort, Norton's recovery has been anything but smooth. The new V4 SV Superbike, a $50,000 flagship meant to erase the past, has faced constant delays. Other promised models still haven't made it into full production, and the loyalists who paid deposits under the previous regime, many still haven't seen their bikes or their refunds. Trust, once shattered, is slow to return. Even as TVS tries to write a new chapter, the shadow of the old one looms large. Norton's brand value is soaked in nostalgia, but also scandal. For every new rider willing to give it a shot, there are dozens who won't touch it. The dealer network is practically non-existent outside the UK. Parts availability remains inconsistent. Despite the hype around Norton's British-made revival, the numbers tell a quieter story. Production is low, margins are thin, and outside of select shows, the bikes are rarely seen. TVS has patience, but patience isn't infinite. If Norton can't transform its reputation and scale up production fast, it may be facing another reckoning, one it won't survive a second time. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about mismanagement or brand revival. It's about the cost of betrayal. No amount of carbon fiber or heritage badging can undo the damage when trust is gone. Some brands collapse in fire. Others are quietly buried in dust. But there's a kind of tragedy in forgetting. You don't remember this name for its downfall because you forgot it ever stood in the first place. Sliding into the number 2 spot with a forgotten legacy, Mitsubishi. Long before the world moved on, this automotive giant wasn't just building cars. It was crafting motorcycles, machines that once roared with the same precision and power that defined the brand. And in the post-war boom of the 1950s and 60s, it looked like Japan's next two-wheeled titan. Under the Silver Pigeon and Mitsubishi brand names, they rolled out scooters and small displacement bikes meant to compete with the likes of Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki. For a brief moment, it worked. The bikes were sturdy, reliable, and practical. Mitsubishi had the industrial muscle, the distribution reach, and the ambition to take on Japan's best. But ambition means nothing without commitment. And as the motorcycle wars heated up through the 1970s, Mitsubishi quietly stepped off the battlefield. While Honda was innovating with CB series engines and Yamaha was developing racing DNA, Mitsubishi shifted its focus entirely to automobiles. The motorcycle division faded into the background, first through reduced production, then through licensing deals, and eventually, silence. By the 1980s, it was over. No fanfare, no headlines, just a slow withdrawal that left Mitsubishi motorcycles as little more than a trivia question. The company never officially announced its exit from the two-wheeled world. It just stopped showing up. In recent years, rumors have surfaced that Mitsubishi might re-enter the motorcycle market, this time with electric models. Patent filings, battery research, and speculative concept sketches have floated around. Some in the industry hoped Mitsubishi would leverage its automotive EV development and bring something fresh to the emerging electric motorcycle space. But hope is not a strategy, and as of 2025, nothing concrete has materialized. What remains of Mitsubishi's motorcycle legacy today is dust-covered and mostly forgotten. A few scattered vintage Silver Pigeons on display at museums, some archived photos, maybe a collector in Nagoya or Los Angeles polishing a 1960s scooter in their garage. But as a living, breathing motorcycle brand, it's gone. And what's left behind is a cautionary tale. Mitsubishi didn't collapse like Norton. It didn't overextend like KTM or lose its way like Harley. It simply let go. Quietly, slowly, and completely. It let the other brands outpace, outspend, and outlast it until there was no room left to return. Today, Mitsubishi's motorcycle identity exists in name only. Dormant intellectual property buried under layers of corporate focus shifts and global alliances. And with the company itself now struggling in the automotive market, the chances of a meaningful return are all but zero. In the motorcycle world, Mitsubishi is a ghost, one that haunts no one, because few even remember it was ever there. Mitsubishi exited without a sound. No crash, no scandal, just silence. But the next brand? It's still standing, barely. Every year, fewer dealers, fewer parts, fewer riders. It's not gone yet, but it's fading, painfully, while everyone watches and no one steps in. And somehow, that's worse than being forgotten. And at number 1, the most tragic of them all, is Moto Guzzi. The brand bleeds history and soul in real time. Too proud to quit? Too lost to recover? It's not just fading, it's unraveling. A slow-motion collapse of one of motorcycling's oldest names, and no one's coming to save it. Founded in 1921 and still building bikes from its original factory on the shores of Lake Como, Moto Guzzi is one of the oldest and most storied brands in the world. For over a century, it stood for craftsmanship, elegance, and a kind of mechanical poetry only the Italians could produce. Its transverse V-twin engine design, shaft-driven drivetrains, and distinctive styling made Guzzi's unmistakable. They weren't just machines, they were characters, quirky, soulful, and unlike anything else on the road. But soul only gets you so far when the world is racing ahead. Today, Moto Guzzi is in trouble, not because it lacks history, but because it hasn't escaped it. The brand produces fewer than 10,000 motorcycles a year, and its global footprint is shrinking. Many cities no longer have a dealer. Part support is inconsistent, and the bikes, still charming, but outgunned in nearly every metric that matters to modern riders. For decades, Guzzi stuck with the same air-cooled, 90-degree V-twin, an engine from the 1970s. While rivals advanced with liquid cooling and integrated tech, Moto Guzzi treated modern features like optional accessories, ride modes, cornering ABS, TFT displays. These came late or not at all. In an age of high expectations, Guzzi's simplicity feels less like a philosophy and more like surrender. Even when it modernized, it struggled to break through. The V85 TT adventure bike was a beautiful throwback, but its 80 horsepower felt weak beside rivals. The new V100 Mandello, finally liquid-cooled and tech-equipped, is a step forward. But one bike isn't enough to reverse decades of decline. Financially, things aren't better. Moto Guzzi is owned by the Piaggio Group, also behind Vespa and Aprilia. And while Piaggio has funded factory updates, its focus is elsewhere. Vespa moves units, Aprilia wins races. Moto Guzzi, it lingers. The historic factory in Mandello del Lario is iconic, but expensive. Labor costs are high. Modernization is slow. Nostalgia doesn't translate into efficiency or profit. Guzzi owners are loyal. They'll tell you no other bike rides like a Guzzi, that the torque hits with personality, that the imperfections make it feel alive. And they're right. There's a raw honesty to every Moto Guzzi. But passion doesn't pay the bills, and when the brand you love can't commit to surviving, that love starts to hurt. The community is shrinking, the network is thinning, and with each passing year, Moto Guzzi feels more like a memory. The kind of brand you hear about at vintage shows, not because it returned, but because it didn't. Moto Guzzi isn't exploding, it's fading, quietly, slowly, tragically. This is a brand that once soared. Now, it's flying in circles, lower, slower, and dangerously close to the ground. And when it finally goes down, it won't be with a bang. It'll be with a silence that only the old souls will hear. Think these 5 are in trouble? They're just the ones still standing, barely. The real wave of collapse is still coming. So before you buy into a name, make sure it'll still be around next year. Hit the next video, because what's coming next might surprise you.